Hi guys, and welcome to the last section of gas exchange. This is part 8 of the mini lectures of chapter 18. So we're going to talk in this last section about the respiratory control areas of the brainstem, and you might remember this from anatomy. So if we look at this region of the brainstem, that's where the control is going to be for the rhythmicity of your breathing, so that you're not thinking about it all the time. It's going to happen by the firing of the neurons from this region. So we're going to concentrate on the regions that I put arrows on. So the pneumotoxic center here in the pons, this is the pons, and two regions here in the medulla oblongata, which are the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory group. And we're going to leave this and this aside for now. Okay, the dorsal respiratory group, or the DRG, is in the medulla oblongata. It's going to innervate the external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm. If you bring those ribs up and bring the diaphragm down, then the volume of that thoracic cavity is going to enlarge and the pressure is going to drop and air is going to come in. So you're going to stimulate inspiration by stimulating this dorsal respiratory group. It's going to be firing, and the firing of that group in the medulla oblongata is going to cause you to breathe, to inhale, to inspirate. The ventral respiratory group of the VRG, also in the medulla, is used for active expiration. So ordinarily, it's just the elasticity of those muscles that are going to release and you exhale. But you can also force it. You can force it, and that then would be the innervation of the internal intercostal muscles, bringing that thoracic cavity back down again, increasing the pressure, and you exhale. The VRG is also going to innervate muscles of the larynx, pharynx, and tongue, keeping those airways open. Very important if you're going to keep breathing. So we've done DRG, VRG, and the last one is the pneumotoxic center. So think of your pattern of breathing. There is a rhythmicity to it. There is a pattern. You breathe in for how long, you breathe out for how long, and without thinking of it, that's what you're doing. So this is the pattern. The inspiratory neurons fire for about 2 seconds. So you're inhaling then. The rib cage expands, the diaphragm contracts, and then those neurons stop firing. So there's a reversal there. So for 3 seconds, there's going to be passive expiration. So inhale for 2, stop, and then passive expiration. Unless you force it, and then you would use the ventral respiratory group. So what if you're not at rest? It doesn't seem like that rhythmicity would hold, right? You need to accelerate that pattern of breathing. Now, when does the body decide to do that? Well, when the chemoreceptors are going to detect either high carbon dioxide or low oxygen, and then they're going to accelerate that pace. So where are those chemoreceptors that are monitoring these levels of CO2 and O2? I think we've talked about that before. Oxygen, CO2, and hydrogen ions. These chemoreceptors are monitoring those 3 things. And they're detected by 2 sets of chemoreceptors. Some are central and some are peripheral. Let's start with the peripheral chemoreceptors. What do? They're going to respond to changes in the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and also they're going to be monitoring pH, if pH is too low or too high. So where are they found? They are found in the aortic arch. That makes sense to put it in the aortic arch because the aorta is bringing blood to the entire lower body. So by putting them in the aorta, we are monitoring the entire lower body, correct? Because that's the income of blood to all that area. And to the carotid bodies. So as they come up to the brain, you want to monitor that pretty carefully. And that's going to see what is coming up to the brain. In a diagram here, here's the aortic arch, and this is also going to help blood here that's coming to the upper limbs. So brachiocephalic artery also. So by monitoring this, you're not only monitoring lower body, but you're monitoring arms also, but not so much head. Somewhat, but we want to be extra careful that there's enough coming to the brain. So here on the carotid arteries is where those carotid bodies would be, and you're extra monitoring what comes up to the brain. Those are the peripheral chemoreceptors. There are sensory fibers involved, and these fibers are in the vagus nerve and also in the glossopharyngeal nerve. Remember these from anatomy? And they will feed into the brain, giving that signal of carbon dioxide too high or oxygen too low. Carbon dioxide, it turns out, is the most powerful of the stimulators. A small increase of 2 millimeters of mercury to 5 in arterial carbon dioxide can double your ventilation, your alveolar ventilation. So a slight change in that pressure is going to increase you to breathe deeper and more frequently. This is a nice diagram that shows here we have the brain stem, and from the brain stem we've got neurons here that are innervating those intercostal muscles. They are innervating the diaphragm and also other muscles that are helping in respiration here. But visibly, it's nice to see that, how those are branching out. Motor innervation to intercostals and diaphragm. What about central chemoreceptors? Well, they respond to changes in the composition of the CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. So this is very delicate, right? You are monitoring the fluid that surrounds the brain. And where are these central chemoreceptors? Where are they found? In the medulla oblongata, and they respond to elevated concentration of hydrogen ions. So pH, right? They're monitoring pH. And what they will fire then and stimulate the dorsal respiratory group, and you will start breathing more deeply and more frequently to bring more oxygen in to the system. Increased ventilation. This diagram is showing you that we have a blood-brain barrier, right? So if this were in blue here, the cerebrospinal fluid, and this is the cerebral capillary, this blood-brain barrier doesn't allow those extra hydrogen ions. Let's say the pH is slightly off, too many hydrogen ions. It doesn't allow those hydrogen ions to cross that blood-brain barrier. So how do we get rid of those hydrogen ions? Well, instead, this barrier is permeable to carbon dioxide. So when carbon dioxide is high in a cerebral capillary, it can cross into the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid then will combine with water, old story here, make carbonic acid, break down into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. Now we've got those hydrogen ions, and those are going to stimulate the central chemoreceptors to stimulate the respiratory control centers, and then you're going to breathe more. Do you understand? So it's not the actual hydrogen ions that can cross and send that alert signal, but given that CO2 can, we can convert that to hydrogen ions. These would get high in the event that CO2 is high, and you can send a signal then to the brain stem for it to increase its respiratory rate. Other than these central and peripheral chemoreceptors, we have some protective reflexes also that keep this respiratory system working well. And one of them is the stretch receptors. So what they do is they inhibit overinflation of the lung. So you want to be able to stretch your lung, but not excessively. So we have stretch receptors that after a certain amount of stretch will send a signal saying stop. And this will diminish that inflation of the lung. So that's a protective reflex. These are embedded in the smooth muscle of the bronchi and of the bronchioles and of the visceral pleura. So this whole system has to be able to enlarge, has to be able to not close too much, right? Has to open, but not open excessively either. We also have irritant receptors. What do? Well, they respond to things like smoke or dust or pollen. So some individuals will be close to a tree shedding a lot of pollen and start coughing right away. Cold air actually is a stimulus for that also. So what it does is those receptors are also neurons. They're communicating with the DRG, with the dorsal respiratory group, and making you cough. And in the event of, they're trying to remove the smoke or the dust or the pollen. And so it's not really a respiratory movement. It's more like a movement to try and eliminate some irritant that's coming in to your respiratory system. These are embedded in the epithelia of the airways. That makes sense, right? Because here's this pollen coming in, and it's coming into this trachea and coming down into the smaller branchings of the bronchi, and you want those to be able to respond to some irritant, move air quickly and try and remove them from those bronchi. What about conscious control? We have, this is sort of interesting that we do certain things where we move air in and out of our lung. Again, it's not respiratory. You can laugh or gasp and crying also. So these come actually from the cortex of the brain and from the limbic system, right, where these feelings are being generated. And they are moving air, but it's not a respiratory movement. It's interesting to think of that. So these are signals that travel from the cortex of the brain down the corticospinal tracts to the respiratory neurons in the spinal cord. They totally bypass the brainstem and they go straight down and make those bronchi contract, move air quickly, cough, and move things out of the way. So that's a whole sort of different system of moving air in and out of the lung. This is the last slide, and this is an interesting phenomenon, not so interesting for a mom who has to live through this with her own child, which is when children go on breath holding spells, BHS as they call them. And it's actually a reflex when a kid is too absolutely angry about something, and they'll have a tantrum and they don't breathe. They're screaming so hard that they stop breathing. And the easiest way then to stop that tantrum and to stop that breath holding spell, right, because they're holding their breath while they're doing that, is to faint. And if the child faints, then this anger and holding of the breath stops, and they start breathing again, and it's fine. And small children will do this. One of my kids did this in a bookstore once, and I was terrified. Some other kid came to snatched a book that she was looking at, and that did not go down well. She started screaming, and pretty soon she was passed out on the floor of the bookstore. And she outgrew it. It's fine. But it's a mechanism that the body has to kind of reset and start breathing again. And that dramatic slide ends this chapter 18. Thanks, you guys. Bye.